Hello, everyone. As always, when we kick off now, next, later, we need to wait to get the waiting room in. So thank you for joining live. Always, we appreciate it. I hope you can hear me. I'm waiting as our attendees go from waiting room to live. Sasha, hello. How are you?
Hey there. I'm well. How are you, Jer?
Good, thanks. I felt like for Monday, July 14th, we just go live. There was no even like waiting room. We just like 12 or I
Got
say
it.
12. I'm in Chicago. Um, but normally I'm in Detroit, so be one, but in Chicago today. So thanks for joining, and thank you everybody who was waiting in the waiting room to come in. We are going to talk credit scoring models today. It's in the news. For those of you who are on LinkedIn at all ever, you saw a bunch of people weighing in on their comments. If you're on Twitter, X, formerly Twitter, I'm going to probably say tweet a lot today, so apologize to everyone. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to never be able to update my technology brain around some of these brand names. But Director Pulte, tweeted last week on X that Vantage Score is now an approved model for Fannie and Freddie, setting off what I was just joking about, which was all the LinkedIn posts. And so we're going to talk about it today. I felt like now, next, later is so often about the future and where we go. How do we get the industry from where we are today, the now, to the next step, to eventually where we want to be? And so credit scoring models fits that. And we've talked about it a little bit because we talk about eligibility and the American dream and how to get more people looked at by the GSEs or others for a loan. Today, Sasha, we're actually hoping to have a guest on as well, but I just want to give everybody a heads up. Tracey King from Partners Credit might just be a little late, as is the summer with working parents. You got camp, you got drop off, you have different things. Tracey may or may not join us. And I said our audience was pretty cool with that because we have a very innovative audience around product development, product strategy, what's going on in the future. So I figured we would all be comfortable with a little bit of, the what we used to call at Quicken Loans, the popcorn method, where people pop in and out of the conversation. So I think that's a pretty substantial intro. I don't think anybody on this call is not familiar with this tweet or this question at this point. Anybody working in capital markets, product development, or policy over the last probably what, Sasha, you think like 8 to 10 years had the question come up at some point, will the GSEs ever approve an alternative credit score? And alternative was kind of a funny word to me, since updating FICO also was a potential option that didn't happen. In other words, like FICO 4 and 5 are not, for those that may not be as familiar, are not the most up-to-date models even from what FICO does on their own. So when we say alternative credit score, we're almost saying alternative to FICO 4 and FICO 5, right? Which is like, it might be an alternative company like Vantage Score, or it might just be FICO has a more updated model. Why aren't we using 9 or 10 or 10T? Hey, Tracey. So I'm going to wait for Tracey to unfreeze. And hello, Tracey.
Hi, how are you? I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, not at all. I was
Hi, how
just
are
saying
you?
just telling the audience that this is how we roll on Now Next Later, especially in the summer. So it's perfect. It keeps our audience on
Yeah,
the toes, which is what we
it,
want.
if anyone's a working parent, they know the summer schedule of, why not throw camp in the middle of the day, at least when this was kind of during my typical lunch break. So I appreciate the patience and I apologize if I have any freezes, but I'm in the volleyball court, volleyball camp parking lot.
That's okay. We appreciate you jumping on during what would otherwise be the drop off lunch break too. So we're in it. We appreciate it. Yeah, I just kind of set the stage a little bit so that Sasha and Tracey, you and I, we can all talk about this, which is funny because I do want to do a little bit of the history, even though the show is Now Next Later. And I was just talking about how over the last 10 years, 8 years maybe, but anybody working in the space of capital markets, product development with the GSEs, or government policy, government affairs, had the question come up about what do we think? What do we think of Vantage Score? What do we think of alternative credit scores? Does the MBA or does our company do we care? What's our position on this? And then it was kind of even more brought to the forefront with related but unrelated policy moves about rent payments being included in mortgage underwriting. How are we going to know about them? Where are they going to come from? Are they included in the credit score, or are they a direct data source? And we all struggled in the capital markets and the product development space with that question. Are we going to incorporate it? If we do, where do we put it in our waterfall? And so today's episode, I want to talk, to some degree about all of that, which is like, where are we now? And where do we go from here? Is this going to unlock any opportunity? So what's real and what's fiction here? So with that, I'll stop. And you've both been asked this. You've both been asked to comment on it. I know you've got evolving thoughts for your companies as well. So we appreciate you coming on before it's like fully baked. But I'll start there, and we'll go around the room and see where the conversation takes us. So Tracey, why don't you go first?
Well, I'll just say, you have really valid points, and so much has been out there, and you think about, the last few years, it all kind of points to confusion. And I think that goes for the lender, but more importantly, the consumer, and the mixed messages that are out there. I know in the credit reporting world, and I'm friends with a lot of colleagues of Sasha's as well that I've talked to this about, where the consumer's like, well, my rent should be included, or I did Experian Boost, or I did something where they felt like they were providing information that enhanced their credit, to find out that, oh, well, but it's not for your mortgage. When they're doing a mortgage pull, or we're looking at the mortgage credit report, to the consumer, it's pretty confusing. And the messaging as well, between, is this going to open up the doors for millions of dollars of loans for borrowers? Well, that's a really good question too. At MBA, it was a pretty heated debate last year between FICO and Vantage. If anyone saw that panel, FICO was pretty adamant about the fact that, you may say this is opening up for a lot of borrowers, but is it? You're kind of making a borrower feel like they are having an opportunity, but they will most likely not qualify. You're kind of getting them eager, and then you're kind of, I think they kind of made the argument, you're then kind of squashing their dreams. You're making them hopeful and taking it away, where, you can add borrowers that have or get a score when they don't have as many trade lines, they aren't as old, they may or may not have rent. How many have rent included that are actually reporting it to the bureaus? How big is that rental company? So, are lenders feeling comfortable providing credit to someone where it's just been open for a month? Even though it's scoring, does it mean they qualify? So I think it's very confusing for the borrower. And if anyone's looked at the playbook that was given out by FHFA, talking about the buy merge, talking about Vantage and FICO, this playbook has changed multiple times and had several iterations of what this would look like. And, prior to it just being FICO and Vantage, it was going to be FICO, FICO 10T, and Vantage. So because the big question is, how do they compare? How do we look at the borrower with a FICO score versus a Vantage score? And what does this mean? So with all of these things and all of these announcements, okay, I agree it's been in a kind of standstill point, but there are so many questions left to be answered that I don't think anyone can move forward feeling confident about. I don't know, Sasha, I know I just kind of went all over the board with it, but those are the big things that I've been, noticing the last few years.
Yeah, when Jeremy reached out and said, "Hey, let's do the podcast on this topic," I was like, "Yes, it is timely. However, there are more questions than answers." So I was like, I don't know how much help. However, I do think, we should talk a little bit more about some of the unknowns and uncertainties and even in my mind, contradictions. But then there are certain things I do think lenders can at least be thinking about and starting to prepare for, knowing that as more gets answered, it will shape how much of that you actually do or implement. But certainly sitting still, I don't think is the right answer. To that end, I think in general, this has just created more confusion, likely more cost, and a lot of uncertainty for lenders on how do I start to plan and think about what this could look like. And, it becomes challenging to do that when, number one, Fannie and Freddie aren't ready. So if they're not ready, I don't understand how this moves very quickly. Um, Government loans are still in question. There's no guidance there. And many of the loans that I think a Vantage Score might help seemingly would be in that space. So that's of interest. LLPAs haven't been addressed, and we all know that's the heart of loan economics is, the eligibility and the pricing of a loan. And so when that hasn't been addressed, now you've got, a catch-22 scenario where it's like, how is a lender supposed to choose? How are they supposed to create guidelines? The intent of this was to open up the door to qualify more consumers that are in need of being able to gain access to home ownership. And yet you're almost creating a potential fair lending issue by trying to solve a fair lending issue. And so it's a prickly pear. And I do not envy being in the lender seat. And we can talk about some of the things that lenders can start to think about and prepare. But overall, there are more questions than there are answers. And I think we have a long road ahead before this becomes a reality in full force.
Yeah, I had very similar thoughts about what are the real obstacles here? Like, what are the actual barriers, right? Because we saw kind of we saw two immediate reactions, I think. I heard from a lot of lenders who have roles that I would describe like we have, which is on the product operations or delivery side, who know all of what we just discussed. And then you had kind of sales, LOs, and others on the sales and marketing side being like, this is great news, right? Question mark. Like, what do we do with this? How do we talk about it? How quickly will we be up and running? And so the two groups were sort of like smashed together late last week, being like, all right, well, we have to have a response to this on the capital markets loan delivery product side, but we don't want to say it's not good news, but we also don't want to say that we can do it tomorrow because we all know that's not true. And so where I kind of landed was, and this actually this would apply to both of you, so you tell me if I was right, but where I kind of landed was lenders getting access to the data point in their system is actually not the problem, right? Like just saying, if we just said to our vendor partners and our technology data partners, hey, I just want to see Vantage Score on a customer starting on a particular date, just turn it on. That's actually not the problem. That's a practical thing. That's an implementation question, and it may take some time, but that's honestly just a data feed right next to other data feeds. What do I do with it? Where do I pull it? Meaning where in my waterfall, my process, who puts it, who pulls it in? What do they compare it to? How do they apply it to a loan data set that has to be delivered to an investor? All of those things are the problem. Yeah. That's where it actually and now, is that an accurate statement that if like a lender wanted to see Vantage, you guys could turn it on?
And that's the later, and that's the problem, right? We can't get to the later without these other questions being answered so that lenders can set up the processes effectively and compliantly, I'll say. However, you hit on a couple points, and Tracey, I'd love your thoughts too, but you can start to talk to your POS, LOS providers and make sure you've got your integrations ready, right? You can talk to your credit providers and make sure you understand, the nuances as it relates to your shop. You can start to at least think about, you might be in a spot where you have to run two models for a while. And so if you had to, what would your operations look like? How would you think about consuming the change? If it becomes something that gets pushed significantly, how are you going to govern making sure that somebody doesn't inadvertently, intentionally or unintentionally, choose a product because it's priced a certain way, right? Like there's a lot of things you can start to, I think, prepare and at least think about. So that way, as the rest of the information becomes more clear and it does start to move towards, okay, we're going to actually implement this, at least you're not behind the 8 ball. But I don't know, Tracey, if you'd agree with that list. I'm sure there's
No,
probably
I
many others.
agree. And yeah, I think, ironically, the credit reporting agency is probably a really small piece of this. It seems like we would be a larger, but for the most part, we've had, and I know several others in the CRAs, we have had Vantage available. If someone said, turn it on, we could have turned it on a while ago. There's nothing to do with it then. You can't submit it. There are some LOSs, I believe, that are ready, but not all. And there's not just one LOS out there. So how can I think to your point, Sasha, there are several conversations that you as a lender should have, making sure, what are you going to have available? Are you working on it? But I'm sure the answer is going to be similar to what ours will be. We are doing what we can as we can. So there have been several technical questions that have been going on since the announcement a couple of years ago, but it is very small moving. And, we can only do it step by step to what's available. And until the GSEs define what this looks like, and to Sasha's point, for a long time, they said that there would be 3 different score models on a credit report before there would just be 2. And then, so will they have FICO and Vantage on a report at the same time? Will they require that? So all of these things impact the technology piece of it as well. So, there are certain things you can have ready, but it's the chicken or the egg a little bit in terms of, we need to have policy and guardrails around this, mainly to protect the borrower. What is available to them? How are they making sure? And as a lender, what are you offering to whom, how, where you're making sure that the borrower is getting the best information, you're getting the best information, how it's working for them. But yeah, we're a small piece and several different moving cogs for this.
Well, I want to dig into that a little deeper because this is the perfect way to kind of step from now into next. And I think I can say this. I don't know that everybody can, but I'm speaking just for me here. I know that the GSEs found out the same way we did, right? They found out by hearing about this tweet, whether someone screenshot it and sent it to you or whether you were on there and saw it yourself. That is how they found out. So I would be comfortable guessing, speculating just for me, that they're free, even with this tweet, to still approve multiple other credit scores next to Vantage, right? Like, so that if they want to, it's to your point about whether they're gonna from their models and what Sasha said earlier about the pricing of the loans, they're fully capable of saying, Vantage is approved, just like the director said. And also we're going to approve whatever it is, FICO 10, FICO 10T, Ultra, something like that, right next to it. So I still think that's completely likely, frankly, that's probably where it goes. It's like, we did that, and also we did this too. And so everybody kind of gets to say, yeah, we did what we were supposed to do, or we did what we were told to do via Twitter. Like, I think that's probably likely. And then second, I was just trying to kind of think through any lender, because this is one of those situations where the type of lender you are does make a big difference. We may have lenders watching, credit unions, banks, who already use Vantage for some other product, right? Tracey, I thought what you said was perfect for mortgage, because that's right where we are for mortgage. We may have some lenders who do private lending, who do consumer loans, personal loans, or auto loans, and Vantage is somewhere in the system of your company. It might not be in your system. It might be in the consumer lending platform or across, in some other area of consumer banking. But FinLocker has, I think, Vantage Score in it. If I'm not mistaken, I have to ask Brian again. But so there are people who have kind of that access, but it doesn't mean anything if we can't use it, especially for loan delivery. And it probably doesn't, and I hate to say this as an innovator, but it probably doesn't really benefit a lender to be early on this. right? Like just looking at it is a really tough spot for a lot of lenders to be, because then you're raising expectations. Like you're really getting people probably ramped up and spending time and money before you know what the GSEs are going to do and what those guardrails look like and what that policy look like. So unfortunately, just being a realist, there probably isn't a ton of advantage to be first here that I can tell.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of, I know there was testing with some of the scores in-house that people were looking at in a similar situation to where you're talking about, lenders that were not sending out to the GSEs, that were looking at kind of side-by-side comparisons. I haven't heard about any data from that since it was kind of released that, a few people would be going live testing. But yeah, I don't know how far you could go without the information that everybody else is waiting for. It's kind of seems a little bit risky, and why would you? Um, why would you need to? So I think you're spot on with that. The other thing, that we haven't touched on, which is interesting with all of this announcement, and then also the announcement of the buy merge, is that, you know, somehow this is being touted as also, credit reports are too expensive, and this is going to help with that. And I don't think that's the case. Somehow I'm not seeing how that's all working out. And, what everyone needs to know as well is, like, while we're talking about this, it's, when we're doing a side by side, if we're doing a side by side of this is Vantage, this is FICO on the credit report, all scores cost money. That is what makes your credit report higher in cost. So if we're adding scores, that's not built into what you're already receiving. That's additional data. So we need to be ready and talking about that as well as we're going down the line. And you brought it up too, of is we're now having it's not a just one system we have to be under. Well, now it's two. It's and one of them's owned by the bureaus. So
Yep.
yeah, it's that's I'm not sure why that narrative is being spun into this, but it's something I think everyone should be aware of. If it's not, this is not necessarily solving that problem. And it's going to
No.
be, I think when people get excited about this, also know that there is a price to it. And from everything that I've heard, it's very similar to the price that is happening now for FICO.
Yeah, you're completely right, Tracy. This exasperates it versus helps it, at least for now.
Yeah.
Just like everything else, competition requires choice. So if we're going to use competition to drive price down, then the GSEs and FHFA have to say, you have a choice, right? And then at that point, there could be an opportunity for that to come into play. But as it stands today, I think it creates, like we talked about, more confusion, more complexity, and more cost, not just from the fact that those prices likely won't decrease, but also because you're adding more into the mix. You have to operationalize things. Now you might be paying for more than you really need to. The other side of this is I don't try to walk this line delicately. This administration is known for rapid fire change at an attempt to create noise that has impact. And whether we like it or not, it has worked. So when Director Pulte put something on X, FICO stock price goes down. I think he believes I now have the validation I needed to know that I can impact. So it might not be for the reasons we would all like to see, but unfortunately, he's got some proof points that it does work to some extent. So again, getting
Yes,
back to the
Sasha.
heart of it.
No,
Go ahead.
I'm glad you said that, because I can take the bait on this, definitely. And I think that here's how I was looking at it. Here's how I was thinking about it was I actually had a hunch, and this was just my subjective opinion. I didn't have any inside information on this. I had a hunch that the GSEs would get there eventually anyway, that these scores would probably get incorporated, because I think one of the key pieces here is that FICO was not part of the underwriting model for the GSE AUS in terms of eligibility. It was a pricing framework, is a pricing framework. So it gets added after you're approved to determine your price rather than determining whether or not you're going to get a loan, except for maybe the floor, right? 620 or something like that. But even that was around getting a price, not getting if you're eligible to have a home loan. So first and foremost, Tracey, I think, said it earlier, they got to figure out the pricing. But I felt like they were going to get there. I don't know if that's how this administration felt, the new director felt, but guess what? Got it done. It's now happening, and it will now happen simply by saying, we got to do this. And so I think that is a key point, that if you were already going to get there anyway, let's not waste another 12 months talking about it. If that's where we were going, just do it. And then we'll figure it out. And that is how things get done. So I got that sense, right, within the context of like kind of responsible modeling of the price or responsible modeling of the risk to the investor long-term, which I think they're doing.
Our industry responds to rapid fire change, particularly if it's regulatory oriented. And this is technically a policy change.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And then I think that other piece, which is, is it going to make a difference? I think that is actually where a lot of people landed after kind of thinking it through and their systems. And I'm eventually going to have to talk to my partners and get this into my system if it is a change, decide where to go. I think then the question became like, are we just doing more on the demand side, even if it does mean more approvals? My comment has always been, it probably means more pre-approvals, not necessarily more won contracts, right? We can do all this stuff on the demand side. And even if it does get more people into the home shopping market, do they win a contract? Do they actually get a house? Or are we just creating more buyers at a time when buyers is maybe not necessarily a problem? That's more of an economics question, because I think some people lately have been saying, no, we actually are seeing a decrease in buyers. But I think there are so many pre-approvals out there that we're just going to create more pre-approvals.
One thing I will say, though, Jeremy, to that point, is potentially if this is going to be reaching what was kind of an unseen borrower before, or someone that wouldn't get in the door, felt like they couldn't because they had different types of non-traditional trade lines and whatnot, it does present an opportunity to work with a borrower for an extended period of time. So with that comes kind of two things. You have the ability then to educate and help improve a borrower where they need to be. So you can kind of maybe talk earlier or get yourself in the door earlier to where a borrower, is starting this process and might have more confidence coming in now because they, before they wouldn't qualify. Now, potentially there's more there to get a score. You have the ability to talk to them about improving their credit, what they need to do, how you can work with them long term. It might not be that fast turnaround, but it does have the potential to help educate. And then the other side too is for all of the score simulator companies out there that are working, they need to incorporate Vantage into their model. Now, I know that there's a few out there, one of which is through FICO that's coming. Not sure how quick they will be to work on the Vantage side, but with Credit Expert, I know that Score Navigator started as a Vantage Score company. So I hope that they would be able to move on that a little bit quicker. But that's something to think about too, is, where that stands, how you can utilize this time as well to educate these borrowers, and what steps are you taking as a lender with your loan officers of like, okay, not everything can be walk in the door, let's close this loan in 6 weeks. We need to also change the way that we're thinking about it and our patience level of education and maintenance with that borrower throughout time.
I really like that. I think that we've been looking for incentives to try to get lenders and MLOs to work with people longer. It's expensive because their time is their most valuable resource. And so the more we can automate that and the more we can actually show people a path, we on this show end up talking to a lot of product people who talk about the Domino's pizza tracker of like a loan application. There's only a few that are like the Domino's pizza tracker of your path to an approval. forget like once the loan's in the system, like what you just described was moving that same mindset that we talk so much about upstream and saying, why don't we give people 3 or 4 milestones and work with them on that? So I'm sure I'll hear from Brian View on FinLocker on that one too. But everybody else, keep that in mind. And so be thoughtful about, where and when you can incorporate this.
I do think
any other
FinLocker
closing
advanced,
thoughts?
by the way. I just think it's 3.0, if I remember correctly.
What's that?
So I do think FinLocker's got Vantage, but I'm pretty sure it's 3, not 4.
3, not 4. So it is 4. I didn't double check this because I've been just saying Vantage Score and I was like, I'll figure out the model later. Was it specifically 4 that it has to be, or was it just like Vantage generally that you think could? Because I was thinking like the GSEs can now do what they want and basically say, well, we approve Vantage Score. Whether it's 3 or 4, they can kind of decide that, but I don't know if that's still up to them, given what the director said.
It would be a specific, similar to FICO. There's, there are actually out there hundreds of score models.
Right.
It has to be specific to mortgage lending. It has to be a specific one in order to move forward. So similar with the whole FICO has been on the same scoring model
4 or
for
5. Yeah.
Oh gosh,
It's only 4 or 5. Yeah.
it's been like
My
10
lifetime.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My whole career.
I think since I've been here. So that's, that's why they're now pushing their 10T. So they're kind of coming out. Finally, the GSEs approved a newer model for them as well. So yeah, there's so many out there. It's just what the GSEs are approving specifically for this.
That's right.
And I do think he said 4.0 in his infamous tweet.
That's what I was.
Speak.
Okay. I
However,
thought so.
I also feel personally like some of the subsequent communications felt like a little bit of maybe I, as per usual, spoke very boldly and perhaps too soon before I had all the facts. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that changes a little bit.
Right.
Well, yeah. So this has been a great conversation because now we know kind of where most lenders probably are landing. We know we need more guidance and I think the guidance guardrails and some implementation help. And then we know something's going to happen. And so I think like this has been good, even with more questions than answers. I feel like this is the type of conversation that's helpful because it frames it up for our audience to know, here's where I have to put this in the now, next, later buckets to know when I need to care. Should I care right now? And if so, in which pieces of this? And I think we said, you're going to get access to the data. That's not the problem. What you do with it's what you got to start thinking about. Next, we have to see specifically what the GSEs say. Which models, how many of them, where does that get in loan delivery and pricing? And then later, what should you be thinking about your product development, sales, marketing, and delivery to say, all right, now I can start building a strategy around this because I've taken a look at these 2 steps along the way. So this conversation was really helpful for me. Hopefully it was helpful for everybody else too, to think of it that way and know where we are with 2 of the experts. So thank you, Tracey, for joining us. And thank you, Sasha, as always. This was fantastic. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for
and we didn't even touch on secondary impacts and the potential of where that might go. So as this continues, we'll have to come back on and
we'll reconvene this
all
group.
of the up
next
and
time there's a
downstream
tweet.
impacts.
Yeah. The next time there's a tweet, Tracey will come back and the 3 of us will do this again. So we appreciate it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week and we look forward to talking to you then.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Good to see you, Tracey.
Good to